Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment, the Apparatus Workshop. I'm Nick Wilbur. Joined with me, as always, Slauch. Today, very special guest. We have Chief Zach Smith from Syracuse Fire Department, in charge of apparatus specifications there, but even deeper into that, gets involved with the NFPA 1900 committee, and a lot of over the last year and a half, there's been a lot of talk and kind of opinions on the new standard that came out, and I feel like it's a pretty good time to kind of break it down, talk about it a little bit more now that it's kind of out there, and rigs are going to start coming out from that standard, and kind of do a deep dive into the standard. So, Chief Smith, if you want to kind of give a little bit about your background, and we'll jump in.
Sure. Yep. Been with the city of Syracuse for almost 20 years now. I have a degree in aerospace engineering and did some work for an OEM as a design engineer for a short period of time. Grew up in the fire service. My grandfather was a volunteer fire chief. My dad was a paid nuclear firefighter. So it wasn't the job I thought I was going to get going through college, but here we are. So
can't get away. I love it. So we'll start off easy, I guess, or easy-ish. What NFPA 1900? Kind of give us a little bit of history, from the 1901 days to now, what it was, and I know there's kind of a change in direction and kind of where it's heading, and kind of your thoughts about some of that.
Sure. No, there's gentlemen on the committee that have been there for literally decades. They would be your experts on that. I joined the committee, I think, in 2021. So I got to do my meetings virtually, which was not fun. There's a next round of meetings going on right now for the next iteration of the standard, and we got to do that in person. That was great, just to have them explain to how we got there, what their thoughts were. The in-person was just so much better than the virtual in 21. But the big change, I think everyone knows, is we combined like 1901, 1911, 1912, where in the ambulance standard, the ARF standard kind of got merged into one big standard, which was a lot of documentation, a lot to go through. So I think the new standard did a decent job of they're trying to clean that up, but they've also, I feel like they're putting a lot more on the AHJ. You really have to know what you're buying and why you're buying it at a time when apparatus are just getting so technical, and there's so many systems. You could probably spend a whole career just in aerial hydraulics or chassis electronics. There's so much specialization in the industry, and all those guys have 20 years of this. It's what they do all day and all the time. And for a lot of departments to spec a vehicle, it's a lot. You really have to be a source expert on stuff that 40 guys are source experts on each individual part of that vehicle. So.
I mean, I kind of see that, and doing the teaching for the aerial stuff, like every time I do a class or talk to somebody that's either an aerial engineer because a question comes up and I ask them a question, or you talk to someone from the crane industry or towing industry, just the insights that they have, and it's like, self-proclaimed expert in aerial operations, right? No one else will tell me that, but self-proclaimed expert, and every day there's so much you can learn every day, and then be able to apply it to the fire service, and then now talk about speccing that vehicle with the nuts and bolts and changes of electronics. It's crazy, and we've talked about that in our shows before with ground ladders, right? Minimum standard, reducing the ground ladder complement into the annex. But now it's up to the AHJ, like you had mentioned, like, okay, you have to go out there and do your studies and your viewpoints on what ground ladders you might need for your first two or your response area. But then there was no information that was provided on the other side of that, right? How do they go find that information? We were telling you what to do, and now it's a recommendation. So I think there was some angst there from some educated people, and then, from some uneducated people or just people with differing opinions. I don't want to say uneducated. They thought it was the greatest thing ever. Now that they have more freedom to spec. So I think there's a lot of challenges out there that some like, some don't like. There's a lot of opinions about it, but yeah, I tend to agree. There's a lot of technical stuff on fire trucks, and just I feel like the guidance might be going away a little bit more at a weird time.
Definitely. It's not a great time for that. And who has the time now in this day and age to become a fire truck expert? Like, it's very difficult. I'm lucky that's kind of all I do 60 hours a week is, run the fleet. I also run the fire stations. So I'm doing buildings and apparatus and everything in between that can break. So I don't even get to devote my full time to fire trucks, which I'd love to just specialize in one thing instead of the whole gamut. It's very difficult. They're very technical, and the standard is become much more open. So you really need to dive into your specs and know what you're buying and know why. Luckily, like I said, I came from the volunteer side of things and a small department. Didn't have the SOPs that I'm used to now. So my specs are based off of if I change, let's say even the crosslays in Syracuse, my SOPs that are pages long would have to change. So that's why you see the specialization in the city department. I'm telling people how to use the apparatus in my rules and regs, in my general orders, that drives the design of the apparatus, or drives me trying to stick with a design, which obviously makes a custom vehicle, drives up costs. But my justification is I'd have to retrain 350 plus firefighters to meet a change. It's not nothing I want to get into, and that's why cookie cutters wouldn't work for us. Other departments, if you don't have SOPs and stuff driving that apparatus, you've actually got some more flexibility to decide what works for your community. But all that just takes time and energy.
Yeah, I think some of those bigger departments out there, there's a breaking point where you just have a bunch of engines, so you can throw an engine out there and replace it. It's almost like you can kind of have that cookie cutter. But then there's that other side of things too, where you look at, maybe that engine, it has to be specified for a specific area. In Arlington, we're very fortunate. Our area is so small that we don't have to go, it's 26 square miles. So we don't have that farmland to this inner city to high rises. We have a pretty general kind of, area that we cover. You look at our neighbor, Fairfax County, they have that vast difference of areas. So their engines might look different in the same fleet. And I think there was a good podcast that Chris McClune did with a bunch of other chiefs on cookie cutters and kind of stock rigs and how they're utilizing them. And I look at a lot of other departments and how that might not work for them, like you said, because there's just too many specialized operations going on.
Yeah, and I've read an article with that same thing kind of in it, that custom isn't necessarily like everybody thinks customs bells and whistles and all this stuff, but custom's really what works for your fire department. And like you said, where yours is SOP driven and you have to make these big changes. That's what custom truly means is how does it make operation. And in that podcast you're talking about, Nick, one of the fire chiefs put safety over top of operations, which I think they have to go hand in hand. But at some point, if you change the hose bed height or the length of a tailboard or things like that, then what you think you're making safe because you're putting, you're upgrading your airbags and your seatbelts, you're also making the fire truck less safe on the fire ground because now they have to climb higher or do something different, based on going to a cookie cutter type apparatus.
We've even worked just with our pump panel layout that we have a preferred layout that we try to break it down in quadrants to help out the OEMs as they do our designs because we buy it from a couple different ones. But trying to pass the 3 o'clock in the morning test when you wake up, the bell hits, the panels are the same, almost identical in most cases, so that if I have you in a spare or a frontline or a recall, those engines now are almost laid out all the same as far as the pump panels go. Getting the driver's compartment area, the pump shift, the air brake, and the transmission shifter are all in the same location. Your right hand can touch all those without having to move them. We've worked very hard in the last 10 years to get to that kind of standardization. But then when you sit in a pre-construction, you get the OEMs kind of rolling their eyes because it's so specific. But now we have 15, 20 engines that are becoming all the same. And then when an older engine hits the training ground, they're training on an engine that's as similar as I can make it to what's actually out in the field, which just drives safety.
Yeah, and I think too, like you say, the OEMs are sitting there staring at you and don't understand why you want them to do all this extra effort. But when you ask them, hey, what firefighting experience do you have? They're like, well, I just graduated college last week. So they don't know why it's important to you to have to do that. And sometimes you have to educate them on that a little bit.
I think as the business model changes for the OEMs, you're seeing less and less firefighters in those positions, and you're having to explain a lot more firematics to them. Doesn't take away from their technical skills or how good they are designing apparatus. Right. They just don't have that base firefighting background that I think you saw in like the 80s and 1990s in those manufacturers. You could talk firematics and get to that point. Everyone understand what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's education going both ways for you to educate them and them to educate you why what you want to do may not be the best way to do it, or may not work anymore. I think you see changes, things that front intakes, things like that, where we see these new two-can exhaust systems. Yes. We're going to have issues trying to continue that process. And, so again, I think it's that education back and forth that becomes really key there.
Yeah, that's going to affect pump modules, front compartments on areas, right. And that's that. But for me now, we store stuff in that compartment the same on every truck. So now, where's that equipment going to go? So, and that's a change that has to happen. We'll figure it out. But
yeah,
all right.
And I think there's the new delivery familiarization, right? An NFPA says that there has to be familiarization done by the manufacturer when they deliver a new fire truck. And I think even that, we talk about how complicated the rigs are. And I've gone to do training in departments after their new rig comes in, they get their familiarization. And I've seen anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours to 3 days familiarization. And some of it is this is very electronically complex rig. They're doing a 2-hour PowerPoint, bring them outside for 20 minutes, show them around the rig where the warning stickers are, and rolling out. So I think between the speccing process getting very involved and then the end user part, if you're not involved in that first speccing part and designing that rig, you're not going to understand when it comes in some of those operational things too. Now, like you said, the pump panel layout and stuff, if you just say, give me a pump panel, and actually the last podcast, we talked about this, pump panel drawings and specifying where things are, that's such a huge part that if you don't know or understand that, you're going to get this thing in and it's going to be a training nightmare and just cost more time, right? And for career or volunteer, it doesn't matter. Time is the biggest enemy of everything. There's just no time to do the training or the familiarization out there. It's just gone.
Yeah. No, when we bring in a new apparatus, we specify that all 4 shifts get hands-on. We prefer 4 hours. If we can get 6, great. Do the PowerPoint and then get out and get the hands-on with the instructor. But we always make sure all 4 shifts get a hands-on with the vehicle before it hits in service. Just within 5 years of a vehicle, things change so much. Even though we're trying to keep it all the same, like you said, the electronics, the DEF systems, all these changes hit, and you have to make sure they have a base understanding before it hits the line.
So I guess going back in NFPA, which isn't a big leap because we've talked a lot about safety and changes to apparatus and things like that. How does the NFPA committee work? So you're generally new to it, but you've been there a couple of years now. I mean, just for users that don't, or listeners that don't know kind of how the NFPA committee works, from somebody that's sat in the seat now for a little while, what does that look like? How do these meetings happen, and kind of what goes on?
So the NFPA sets up a time and they'll get the committee together, and what happens is you need to put in suggestions. It's not just willy-nilly. Everybody throws their ideas into a hat. There's a very well-documented process to get your thoughts or ideas in front of the committee, and then only those are reviewed and discussed. So it's very well regimented. They've got a great system as far as what gets in front of them. What I've really learned is how to get information in front of the NFPA committee. It's not difficult, but you have to know the steps to take, and you can always reach out to the NFPA and ask for assistance, and they'll show you how to get that information, those questions asked. Questions come in from time to time, and we'll get kicked out to like a technical committee. So they're responsive, but the process to get that information, to click on the standard and put in the information and get it in front of the committee, it's whatever's debated is what was presented. So it's kind of nice because there's not a bunch of outside stuff. We're going to go through these things. This first draft meeting we just concluded, hopefully, I don't know if that first draft's been published yet. If people are interested, they can go review all those notes, and then there'll be a second draft meeting coming where we actually vote on the next iteration of the 1900 standard. So there's a great time now this summer, if you get a hold of those first draft notes, to read and review those, and then you can put in public comment on those notes on the NFPA website, and then all those public comments will be addressed at the second draft meeting.
That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, that's one of those things, we hear a lot of people out there voicing their opinions about NFPA, pro and con and all these other changes, but I think that's probably the best thing to put out there, is that you can get involved. I mean, it takes a couple of clicks and some effort, but that's how life works, right? But you got to go through there and put your comments in there and tell them how you feel, because that's who drives the standards, right? So looking at NFPA, and since you're an end user, spec and fire trucks, your background with some of the OEMs prior to, how would you recommend somebody who's never used NFPA before or is using it now maybe and just looking for more information? How do you recommend somebody use NFPA when they're specing their fire truck?
I'm a little dated. I always prefer the book in front of me, the actual paper document in front of me. You can obtain that, electronically. In the annexes, you'll see a lot of that information we're used to in 1901. So I would get a copy of that standard and review it. And honestly, I wouldn't say skip the meat of the standard, but I would jump to the annexes and start reading all these great recommendations and lists and the tools and equipment that are in those annexes and learn those, and then go back through and go through the standard itself, which the OEM should be, and your salespeople should be very familiar with. But those annexes, hopefully they would trigger a bunch of ideas or questions to be asked. And how do we meet the NFPA standard? Use all the information in that document, but actually start in the back. If I was starting out with NFPA, I would start in the back, read all that information, then start looking at the questions I need to ask for my HJ, my response district. What do I need to look at? So.
I think there's a lot of technical stuff in NFPA 1900, and there's a lot of changes. I don't say a lot of changes, but changes here or there that are kind of not really end user specific, but sometimes can affect that. One of the standard changes from this last edition was the ground pad forces that are applied on the ground from 75 to 100 psi. Now I don't. Even in the next iteration rig that comes out, maybe won't increase at all, right? But that's one of those subtle changes that if you're not paying attention to it, that could alter some operations, right? And how your rig affects the ground and where you used to be able to set up now maybe could change, right? What 25 PSI doesn't sound like a lot, but it could have a bigger impact than just one line change in the NFPA. So some of those big things there, how do you feel the NFPA does communicating some of those changes? And I mean, there's always room for improvement, obviously, but what would be your recommendations to people when those new changes come out? How to kind of absorb that and look at all that, because there's a lot of technical stuff. So
there really is. With the ground pressure thing, I was just thinking jack pads. Some OEMs are like, yeah, we don't need jack pads anymore, and that's ingrained in our SOPs and our standards. And honestly, we would always just keep them because I would want to give myself the best opportunity to distribute that load and keep any aerial mishaps from happening, especially if you get into like short jack situations and stuff. But that hit, and like you said, I don't know if everyone appreciated what that really did. You just saw some numbers change, and it's technical until your aerial tips over, because you could set up here now and it's soft ground. We've always operated in that. We get so far in the city, like we're not allowed to set up on sidewalks for obvious reasons, or not so obvious unless you set up on a sidewalk and the vault underneath the sidewalk collapses, right? So those numbers, like I said, minor number change, huge difference. But as far as being involved and seeing what's coming, like you really just have to read the standard and ask the questions, and it is a great way to go to sleep at night. Grab a paragraph or a page. It is very technical. It's very dry. The meetings aren't easy to go through all the information, and there's just so much information crammed in that document. And then where does that information go when you actually start taking it in, and what does that actually drive for changes? It's a lot. It really truly is a lot. So like I said, you got to make yourself a source expert, and that just takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I think too, you start in the back, there's so many forms and documents in the back in the annex that will help you go through every process. And like you said, it gives you the questions to ask. What are we looking for out of this? Especially if you've never done this before, or if you are looking to change, kind of what you have to something different. It has that documentation in there. The weight, again, like the process of bidding a truck, or however you want to go through it. It's all there listed for you.
But it's just a great spot. Like, say you're buying a tanker, and all of a sudden you're asking these questions, and hopefully then it gives you a chance to ask the question of your salesman. Hey, we want to carry 3,000 gallons, but we have a lot of hills. So what are those changes? So you should be, all of a sudden the salesman should be saying, well, we need to talk about brakes. We need to talk about some kind of maybe like Jake brake or like Talma retarder. What are we doing for an engine? What are we doing for a transmission, axle, suspension? So you've taken that 3,000 gallon tanker, and now you're dialing it in for your response area. If you've got a lot of hills, up and down, obviously that will drive a bunch of chassis changes, hopefully. But that's starting the annex and starting to ask those questions. All of a sudden now you have a vehicle that everybody loves because it can handle the hills with all that water and weight, right? If otherwise you might get a stock tanker that's great in Iowa, but horrible in upstate New York.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of things we've talked about on this podcast, a lot of, where is that separate? You go and put a rig down on a piece of paper tomorrow and it can look great and maybe operate great. You go to the next jurisdiction over and they copy and paste the same thing and it could be the worst rig in the world because it's not meeting operational, it's not meeting their topography or staffing or whatever else, and copying. Maybe you made one or two changes and it really vastly affect the rig in a negative way. So we talk about that a lot, just leaving some of the things up to the experts. But again, what questions to ask? Because we, again, self-proclaimed experts on spec and fire trucks here that talk on a podcast, but you could, fool us with whatever because there's so much information out there. But from us being able to go and do this a lot, be in factories, talking to end users, talking to people like yourself that are on the committee that have spec fire trucks before, and just being in that overall community of sharing information is huge, because if you don't dive headfirst into this information and consume yourself with it, I just feel so bad with that standard change for some of these smaller departments where the career volunteer, they're specing one rig every 20 years. Mm-hmm. And this is the year it came up, because with all the challenges with affording the apparatus, with the complexity of the rig now with the electronics, the new motor, there's a lot of unknowns out there that they don't have the time to go and invest into figuring that out, but they have to go and now tackle this and hopefully buy a rig that's going to stay in service and be a serviceable rig for 20 years. Right. And so I really feel for those people, and, we try offering the best suggestions we can and the most information to help people do better. And I think the annex is a great place to start. But again, if you really truly want to knock it out of the park, it's really just engaging in your manufacturer and having conversations and divide and conquer, man. Give everybody somebody do the chassis, somebody do the pump, everyone on the committee take a little section and go review some of those NFPA standards and, kind of highlight some important things and ask the OEM to give you, some information back and engage that conversation, I guess is the best thing I can say. Sure. Because I'm still reading that thing and I go to sleep just fine every night.
I've got a PDF hot tab to my computer and I'm in it once or twice a day trying to reference it, and sometimes jump back to 1901 as we do repairs. Like it just lives on my computer. It's probably always open trying to reference something or look at something. And even the NFPA breaks down the vehicles into task groups, right? There's an aerial task group, a chassis task group. Like even the NFPA committee breaks it down into parts of the vehicle, just trying to digest all this information and all the technical stuff that goes with it.
So all your time now, spec and fire trucks and getting into the position on the NFPA committee, how did you get there? So if somebody wanted to get involved in NFPA, somebody wanted to join the committee or kind of get more involved in apparatus, what were things that you did? Obviously going to school to be a rocket scientist or
anyone that actually knows me is rolling their eyes because I am not that. So
but how did you, what have you done throughout your career to kind of help set yourself up?
I had applied way back in the day to try and get on the committee just based on some of my qualifications and wasn't selected. And then I ended up, I'm the IFF's representative now. And I started out as an alternate. And then when the gentleman had me as a primary retired, I became the primary for the IFF to the NFPA committee. So there's labor, there's end user, there's a bunch of different categories. I'm sorry. Oh, they're all eluding me, but there's different seats on the table at the committee, and NFPA is looking for not just this standard, many other standards. So to get involved in any standard, it kind of drives, we're all driving together, right? It's all kind of the fire service. 1900 being one of the larger ones, I end up knowing a gentleman that was working with the IFF for a couple other different standards. And he said, hey, I know Zach, this is his background, and then put my resume into the IFF, and they put me forth to the NFPA. That process took like a year and a half, I think, to get approved and on the committee. So kind of right place, right time, and had to start out as an alternate, which was fine. And then work your way into the primary position. So and most people on the committee have the alternate spot. If you can't make it, I'm there to back up the primary. So there, you can apply at any time. I believe the NFPA's got a link, and to try and get on the committee. I'm not an expert on that. And I'm lucky enough to know someone on the IFF that was willing to put me forth. But it's a lot of fun. I'm super glad I did it. Just to sit there and look at all the people in the room and all of the firepower, the brain power for fire trucks. Like, I was totally nerding out. Like, the conversations were great, and I really enjoyed everyone's thoughts. It was pretty neat. So
I think that's an interesting perspective and a great perspective to have all the people that complain out there, and me being one of them every once in a while that complains about NFPA and how much work and effort there is that goes into in the backside of this. Isn't just, like you said, the process from receiving feedback from people and trying to have a good conversation and put that information into a standard and everyone converse about it. I'm sure some of those rooms can get pretty heated, and the conversation be very lively.
yeah, everyone's got their take and their input and how it's going to affect them. But like I said, the in-person was just far better. To be able to put that on here and listen to everyone's point of views was super worthwhile. So,
with the direction that the NFPA 1900 is going now, what do you think are the big drivers? Like we've kind of alluded to, that the NFPA going from this, back in the day, this standard that kind of laid out all the ins and outs of a fire truck, to now there's a lot more information. I won't say a lot more, but good information in the annex that guides you in the right direction. But it's kind of backed off on what it's requiring you to have. What do you think's driving that decision?
I think 56 years ago, you had committee members that were maybe a little more selfish and were looking to put some changes in that benefited them. And some of that just became, that's the standard, and no one touched it. And I think some of what you're seeing is we're really looking at every part of the standard and evaluating each and every sentence, period, comma. It's literally that specific as to how it's being written, what's the intentions of it. And a lot of it was restricting some of the design work. Maybe it was too restrictive. Maybe it wasn't. Like, time will tell. I'm still mixed with some of the conversations we listen to. I like to have a little more protection as a buyer and an end user, but I can see where an OEM would like to have, like, take off the restraints. Let me design something that doesn't meet these very standard. No one knew why in 1981 we had this in the standard. Actually, there's a couple of gentlemen that probably on the committee could explain to you exactly why those lines were in there. But what that's the biggest change, I think, is it's being opened up, which is, it's good and bad, right? There's I won't say less control, but it's more open to interpretation, so that you just doubling down on the AHJ has to know what they're buying and has to really know why they're buying it. And it's going to take a lot of work, I think, for the end user to know. And hopefully the OEMs will be there to support them, because you still got to fix these things at the end of the day. No matter what it is when you buy them, it's the fixing, repairing, and downtime. It's very difficult right now, and that's really no one's fault. Trying to get parts in the door, everything going on in the world, it's really no one's fault per se on the committee. But everyone sees a fire truck down, and it's easy to start pointing fingers as to why. Well, it's the way we spec'd it. It's the way they can fix it. There's just so many factors that drive this now.
Now, with, I guess, your experience on both sides of the fence here, and using the NFPA standard, referencing it, kind of what it was, your background in the OEM, do you think that there's, I guess, what was the best educational piece or educational things you could do? I know, FEMA just had their first educational series this past year. Obviously, FDIC is coming up, and obviously Wealth of Knowledge out there. What are other places that you found information and can kind of help educate yourself? Obviously, the Apparatus Workshop podcast should be number one in the list. But what are other places that you found that were helpful to educate you outside of maybe those big trade shows that we've kind of mentioned already?
Just trying to grab all the publications that are out there. So I subscribe to all of them and receive all of them and read as much as I can and try and take them all in. So all the publications I can get my hands on for the fire service, I do subscribe to all of them and read as much as I can out of all of those. Just talking to like neighboring departments and learning. If someone bought a vehicle in the last 5 years, I would be talking to them in pros and cons. And then as you dial it down, I would definitely try to get to a manufacturing facility if at all possible. especially if you have an apparatus community that doesn't have a ton of experience, I would try and get them into a factory so that a lot of these conversations, you can see how a fire truck gets put together. I know, I grew up right around the corner from Salisbury, and my grandfather knew them, and we still talk with the family and see them, and see Alan stops in the shop here from time to time and chats with us. So I didn't realize how lucky I was in that regard, that they're just building fire trucks around the corner, and everyone locally knew how fire trucks got built if they didn't work at the factory. So that kind of base knowledge was just ingrained in central New York. But a lot of people, I don't think, have the opportunity to get to a factory and see how they get built and understand. I think that's huge. That would be one of my first steps, is try and get some factories and just see and understand the process, and then maybe helps you drive a better spec. And honestly, I love getting in factories and stealing great ideas. Everyone's always doing something better than I am, and I'm willing to steal your great idea any day. So.
Yeah, we've mentioned that before in some of the podcasts. Like, there was a big push, especially during COVID, and there's been a carryover of doing the pre-engineering virtual, and how that, like, we just don't support that. Not, again, some people with money constraints, there's a lot of other factors in there, so I can understand it. But if there's the option or the ability to go out to the factory, do your pre-engineering, that is by far, because when you're sitting there in the room, like, oh, we want to do X, Y, Z, the fire truck. Well, let's go look out and see if we can find one that maybe does it that way, or does it a different way, or just to walk around. And you're 100% right. So many specs have changed from pre-engineering, being out there at the factory and walking around. You're like, I want to do that because that looks really great, or that works.
Yeah. I just love being in the factory and learning. Yeah, you'll see those two cans in the way of the front suction, and like, this is why I can't get that 5-inch pipe through there now. These huge things sitting right here that can't move. Yeah. And that just helps. It quickens the conversation when you can just see it in person, especially with as complex as these vehicles are. And you almost have to, right? We're into $1 million purchases for these vehicles. It's there. How we got there, you could sit here and argue that in a whole other podcast, but we're there now. That's what these cost. Municipalities don't have a ton of money. No one really has a ton of money in funding right now. So when you make this kind of investment, like, you have to dedicate the time and energy to understanding what you're purchasing. We're into 7 figures. So to me, it has to happen, but it's easy to say because it's kind of my job. If it wasn't my job, it's tough. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time and effort. So.
Well, I think kind of what you said, there's two things there. Is that you said, you want to get in the back in the annex and start reading, because those will lead you to questions that hopefully your salesman has the ability to answer. But we know there are great salesmen out there, and then there are the brand new salesmen who have no idea what you're talking about. You can say NFPA 1900 to them, and they have no idea.
What's the qualification for an apparatus salesman?
Right, exactly. So, yeah. So, again, being there at the factory and being able to get those answers from people who have that knowledge, just increases the ability to build a great fire truck. And then again, some of those other things, like, you talk about being at the factory and seeing, why I can't do something or why this may be better, similar to why you guys in Syracuse require so much stainless steel stuff, stuff like that, corrosion resistance, is galvanized better than something else, that stuff, when you say, hey, those are the things that you really have to dive into. And that's, I think that unfortunately the NFPA 1900 covers a lot of stuff, but it leaves a lot out. And especially as we get into cookie cutter type, apparatus, where you're going to start to lose some of that, ability to build that protection into your fire truck, you have to dive farther into it and understand that somewhere.
Yep. Up to and including, I could see to maybe taking exceptions to 1900 in some areas if things keep progressing, and knowing, because now you're taking on the risk, which is huge for the fleet management people. Well, it should be for everybody, but I'm taking on the risk times X amount of firemen. The bigger the fleet, the bigger the risk, right? And no one wants to see anyone get hurt, but which one is safer? A more technical vehicle that's more prone to breakdowns, but is newer, or the older truck that doesn't have all the safety standards that I can keep on the road more? I think you're seeing a lot of that kind of fleet management going on, and you go through the used fire truck catalogs and you're looking like a 1991 so-and-so up for sale, and it's like, it's gone the next month because somebody bought it, and it's like, wow, that's a risk, right? But what's worse, not having a fire truck? So that decision's happening on the daily for everybody.
Right.
I think it goes back to Wynn's latest article on the tires as well. I mean, I read some of the comments. You're supposed to not look at the Facebook comments, but I look at those and they're like 7 years, 10 years is a tire thing, and everyone's arguing, making all these arguments. But it's like that's there for a reason, right? Like that's firefighters' blood, and but I get it, the money, right? How you have a tanker that sits there for 7 years, runs maybe 10 calls a year, 70 calls total, and now you're going to spend 10 grand on new tires and for what? And so I think that, and that's not necessarily the NFPA 1900 standard, but still going back to NFPA. And so there's a reason some of that stuff exists, and there's research and there's data and there's thought behind it. It doesn't just happen. And I think a lot of people lean into the fact that there's manufacturers that sit on that committee and that they're out to make money. And maybe some of it could be, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that when you look at firefighter fatalities and you see the firefighter fatalities that stacked up behind that standard, it's very difficult to say that they're just going to make money, right?
Yep. No, I wish there was some more labor members on the committee. It kind of lonely sometimes. There wasn't a ton of IFF members there with me. It'd be nice to have a little more of a gang or group to help push things through. The FAM is very well represented, and they do a very good job, and they're very well prepared. So it's, I'm not a full-time committee member. Like I have a side job and a family too. So it was interesting to see how well prepared they were and the things they presented to the table, which should be out in the first draft, and tires were definitely discussed. But then, I get into it. Like if I get 6 months out of a set of tires, I'm doing really well. So right. No matter my biggest bugaboo is like, I'm not going to go pick up, a new engine with 5-year-old tires on it. Even though at the end of the day, they're not going to make it 8 months past when I take delivery of it. But, I'm obviously watching those all the time, knowing what tires cost. But for the fleet number of runs, 6 to 8 months out of a set of tires. And usually especially for upstate New York, it's like, can I get it through the winter? How much tread depth is left? And for the cost of fire trucks now, it's crazy to make the call to take tires off in August that I know won't make it through till January, but I want to give as much tread depth as I can for the snow months that are coming. So it's a cheap insurance policy to just change the tires out. But yeah, we're spending $8,000-$10,000 to change those tires out, but just trying to keep the crew safe, knowing that, the 6 inches in an hour are coming. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more. There was an article that Tom Shannon wrote a while back, and this is probably years ago, but can you build an unsafe NFPA compliant fire truck? And the answer is yes, right? And I think now with the standard change, it might even be more possible because there's decisions like that, right? Mm-hmm. With tire, tread depth that might be safe, but now you're in a snowy environment. There's so many, with the fire service, there's so many things. And I was talking to, a non-firefighter today actually about this. When you need something, you call the fire department, and our job is so it could, vary, right? We're going to the mountains for a search and rescue mission or deployment for forest fire. You could be gone for however long. Or you're just going on a call for, 5 minutes down the road. And so there's a huge, vast difference of what that mission of the vehicle is or how that vehicle is going to be used. Even the speed, right? A lot of people argue about the NFPA required speed. Well, I'm going to be on the highway all the time. And then you look at, some of the incidents and accidents that have happened. You see somebody going down the Anytown, USA at 65 miles an hour with a fire truck and getting into an accident and hurting and killing people.
Yes. Speeds were brought up at the last meeting, and some real world stuff came into it where the state highway police were not happy with the speed of the fire apparatus. It was blocking traffic by going too slow. But Syracuse is small. I don't need or want you going fast, and we've done things with the gearing that we've gone to 6 speeds, the first 2 gears to kind of get you going, get you up to speed, starting and stopping. I don't need 60 miles per hour in the city of Syracuse. And we've worked our way down from 65 to 62 to 60. And gotten better gearing results because of that for the starts and stops, that 15 to 25 mile per hour range. But I don't have to go run 45 minutes to the other side of the county, and nobody wants to do that at 50 miles per hour, looking at like a header the whole time. That comes back to the AHJ and coming back to taking an exception to the NFPA. Like if you do that, you could justify, hey, look, I have to get to the other side of this county. It's 30 miles. I am the closest engine company. I cannot drive 50, 55, 60. I know what my vehicle weighs, but then can you outweigh that with training, SOPs, and like if you're going this speed, these are the things the officer has to okay it. like what do you do to go above and beyond or change direction from what NFPA says? And that's once again back on the AHJ, who's going to take assume the liability for that risk.
Right, and I think you mentioned it before. You take an exception to that because you want to go faster, but you don't think about the ramifications behind it. And you just laid out a whole bunch of great arguments for why you might do it and how you would justify it. But most people don't think about that, and so you get tied up to why does this have to be so strong and staunch? But it really has to be because we're trying to protect ourselves.
Sure.
There are ways around it. You take that exception, but again, you have to have the reasoning behind why you do that and why you're willing to make a fire truck, less standardly safe than it should be. But, again, you have to have it for your first due. Your custom first due is required. So,
yeah, I even heard the argument that, this was more recently, that they didn't put a second axle onto a rescue squad because it would limit their speed down by NFPA because their weight tolerance would go up, so they would have to go slower. So they opted to go with the single axle so they could go faster because their chief wouldn't sign off on the NFPA variance. And I was like, that's an argument, right? Like, okay, I get that, but now we look at what that does. You now have a vehicle that's carrying the same amount of weight with less braking power, less axles.
The first thing I thought was like someone needs to go weigh that thing because I'm sure it's overweight, especially if you give it to a rescue company. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And we talk about weight all the time. We talk about mission of the vehicle all the time. And I think that's a huge, consideration there is, it might, and maybe educating the chief, right? It might not just be that firefighter or the lower person or the committee members, thing. It's educating the chief that, hey, we have these assignments. We would like to go faster. And if you allow us to go the same speed we were going in this other rig, we actually have more braking power now to stop easier, better weight distribution, and it's probably going to be a safer ride.
But
so
I'm willing to bet if you brought it to the chief of fire, he's going to go, well, I may need to talk to like the corporation counsel. I may need to talk to the mayor. Like, who does he report to be able to take on this kind of risk? And that's not a fun like firehouse coffee table discussion, but that's the real world. So once you do the first 20, 30 accidents as a fleet manager, all these things start becoming clear. So
yeah, I can imagine that. So I guess going to your committee now, obviously you have a wealth of knowledge and the background in it. How do you guys select a committee in Syracuse? And then what do you do to prepare those members to kind of get up to snuff and to kind of help spec fire trucks?
So right now we're in a really lucky place on the committee. Obviously I'm on it. I have a superintendent of maintenance and assistant superintendent of maintenance. So I have 3 members de facto on the committee. I have my mechanics obviously in-house, and I have a mechanics supervisor. And then depending on where the apparatus is going, we loop in the company captain. Especially specialty hazmat rescue, the captains get looped in. The engines and trucks, they're more dialed in. But we reach out to them, said, hey, you have a new vehicle coming. What can we do? What are we doing? And we've gotten some feedback. Some stuff we can try and help them out with. Other stuff not so much. But we generally don't like to get more than 4 or 5 people in a committee. That's kind of our sweet spot. We've got a couple of firefighters that are actually EVTs, and they're part of the committee and get looped in, and then trying to progression. Like, I'm not going to be here for forever. Who's coming down the pike that needs to know in 10 years when I'm gone, the vehicle's still here, how we bought this vehicle, how we got here, how we're trying to maintain it. So we probably have 7 to 8 members of the department right now that are kind of a rotation helping outside of the company captains that they'll be theirs to fix when I'm gone. So.
Shoot, 10 years, you might be ordering a fire truck today and just getting it in by the time you're leaving.
I am very fortunate. We've been allowed to get ahead with our capital purchases. I'm out through, I want to say 2029 or 2030. It's ordered now, but coming in then, just trying to keep our fleet up to date. So I am super lucky. I'm not the norm. I know that. I'm super appreciative of where we're at with apparatus.
Yeah, from Arlington's perspective, we're in the same boat now that we have things on order coming in 29 and 30. And again, same thought process. We are not the norm. We're very fortunate to be in that position that we have educated. They're educated enough, and we've had conversations that like this needs to happen. Otherwise, we're not going to be in a very good spot. You see those headlines everywhere. Almost every major city has gone through it at some point in time now, that they're in this backlog, or they don't have rigs in service, or maintenance is an issue. It's not going to go away anytime soon.
No,
that's for sure.
not the way things are stacking up now. So it's going to be crazy. And then I was thinking, as we talked about the NFPA standard, the old story of like the mayor went out and bought a fire truck, like someone uneducated that doesn't really, doesn't not care about the fire service, but is not as concerned about an apparatus, the ability with a new standard to buy a compliant 1900 vehicle and maybe not meet your needs. I think that opportunity has definitely grown, and that one worries me.
Yeah, we've talked about that with the ladders, the not requiring ladders that can really get you in trouble. But, going across and teaching the ladder complement needed is very wide, it's very wide, and what's needed, and how it's needed to carry, and staffing, and how it's responding, what else it carries. It's definitely.
I hope we don't get to the place where it's like, well, you want ladders on this bumper? Great. Then I'm going to have to design a new body. Oh, you want to mount those ladders? I hope we don't get into an era where it's like change order. That all I want to do is carry my basic complement of engine ladders we're accustomed to, but now it's turned into like this I got you game of, you want to carry ladders on your bumper? Fine. But, these are the things you're going to have to do now to carry those. And you weren't expecting that. So especially if the mayor buys your bumper and you show up and he's like, I bought a 1900 compliant vehicle. Great. Where's the ladders? Where's the pike poles? Where am I putting my extinguishers? So that stuff worries me. With the standard, especially with the cost as high as it is, it feels like we're kind of moving in two different directions, and maybe not for the benefit of the fire service. So.
What do you think? What's your recommendation to kind of help with that? I mean, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, getting people getting involved, right? I mean, putting in the public comment, putting their voices out there, getting educated. I mean, that's kind of, I think, where we're at now, and it stinks because there's so many things now. You add in all the different missions we're responsible for, putting on ballistic vests and active shooters and many things that 20, 30 years ago you weren't even talking about or considering. So there's a lot more missions now into this, but I think, like we said with your committee, I don't laugh, but I admire the setup of your committee. You have a lot of mechanics, not a lot of firefighters, but that's because that's what the vehicle is. I mean, I think that there's a lot of committees out there that maybe have one mechanic, if that, and that's who they rely on. But really, that's a lot of, we talk about gearing, we talk about keeping in service, parts availability. There's so many parts of that vehicle that rely on being serviced and kept in service that it's not the operational side necessarily.
And I'm super lucky because my SOPs have pretty much designed the apparatus for me. So now it's a question of how do I buy this thing so I can fix it as quickly as possible and keep it in service. And that's kind of on the mechanics. And then kind of the joke is that the chassis is mine as far as the line's concerned. All that's going to be driven by the mechanics. But when we get into the body or the pump module, that's when we'll take input from the line and see which ways to go with it. So
awesome. Well, we've kind of rounding around that kind of hour mark here. We've covered a whole lot of information. I'll give you a couple minutes, give your closing thoughts. Anything else you have, advice on 1900 or spec and fire trucks and using the standard, and then we can kind of wrap it up.
Just get involved, learn as much as you can. Hopefully you have a passion for the service like I do, and I still enjoy it. Like, the best part about this is there's something new every day. No day in the shop is the same, and that's what keeps it fun, keeps it challenging. I don't need all the challenges I have, but just enjoy it, and then just do the best you can. You're not going to get everything right. It's almost impossible. But to make yourself educated, go to the shows, go to the OEMs, talk to a bunch of salesmen, talk to neighboring departments. Like there's things you can do that some cost money, some don't. But with the cost of these vehicles, you have to get out there and do a lot of due diligence before you even come anywhere near writing a spec. So,
Lynn, you got any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, I think we covered it. I think the chief hit it, the nail on the head. Is you have to be in that manual. I mean, not necessarily in it, but get in the annex and pick the parts out that are really, really important to you. You don't have to read the whole manual. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it, is you can pick the parts out, but the annex is definitely, probably one of the most important parts. for all the information that it provides you. And like Chief said, it just opens up questions to ask your dealer. And, again, make sure you're happy with the answers. And again, you have to be educated in some of that stuff too. You almost want to know the answer that's going to come back from him, because then you can fact check it basically. And unfortunately, that's what you have to do, is fact check it. And, like he said, you're going to make mistakes on everything. You're going to miss something. Something's going to come in and you're like, oh man, how do we do that? It's just so much. I mean, you're looking at 15 pages of a component list and, 100 plus pages of an actual spec. Like, you're going to miss something. So, just get educated, stay educated, and stay involved in the thing is, like we always talk about, is the key.
Yeah. I think for me, it's reaching out. You'd hit on reaching out to neighbors, asking people, spec'ing fire trucks. We hit this on a podcast not too long ago. Once you spec a fire truck, doesn't matter if your next one's 10 years from now, you're not out of it. You're preparing for the next spec. You're looking at operations, how it's changing within the department, regionally, what's changing, how your rig's being used regionally or mutual aid wise. You're looking at what mutual aid neighbors are doing. You buy a ladder truck, and the 3 other ladder trucks in your response district are have been replaced. What did they change? Are they adding ladders, taking ladders away? Did their mission change? Because now, as you prepare to spec your next ladder truck, that all should be known, because that'll dictate what you do to yours. People have gone from non-tiller trucks to tiller trucks because neighbors around them have shrunk and gone to quints or smaller vehicles with less ground ladder complements, and now they don't have their neighbors to rely on to bring the ground ladders. So now they have to do that in-house or be that regional service that brings them to the party. So I think, the one and done is not a thing anymore. You spec a fire truck and the committee dissolves and it's there. It's talking to those people, even if you're not on the committee and you want to be on a committee one day, talking to the people that spec the rig before. Like you said, from the committee, why did you do that? How did we get here? And asking those questions and understanding that, because it may not be applicable today, or they thought about some crazy stuff that you weren't even thinking about, and it might still be applicable. And you need to consider that in what you're doing. It shows everything, getting involved, asking other people, looking on Facebook, looking at all the other specs people are doing, and then make those calls. We went recently for Arlington to go look at other people's technical rescue box trucks. And everyone's like, oh, this is cool. And everyone's showing off the highlights. The first question, what would you change? That was the first question I asked them, because I'll look at this thing and look at all the cool stuff. But if you like, hey, man, I really hate this part of it, I might think it looks cool. But if you would change that, then we're not even going to consider that in our spec.
Right.
And so it's really great to get that honesty of, because you're never, like Gwen said, you're never going to get it 100% right. So hearing that feedback and kind of taking other people's pros and cons and morphing it in is exciting. It's a cool thing. So, but Chief, appreciate you taking your time out today and spending some time with us. Definitely probably tapping your expertise in the future on one of these podcasts. But
thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Apparatus Workshop. Any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to reach out. Nick, N-I-C-K, Wilbur at evr.solutions. And like we've mentioned on this podcast, get involved. NFPA 1900, they're going through their first draft edition. Check it out online. Get involved. Put your comments in there and help shape the future. Be safe out there, and we'll see you on the next podcast episode.